She stood on the mat, her cheek burning red, surrounded by silence. Everyone had seen the slap. No one spoke. No one stood up. All because she said her grandfather was a legend, a man the world had forgotten. But 7 minutes later, that same man walked through the door. And what happened next? The world didn't just remember his name. They remembered hers. This is not just a story about martial arts. It's about what happens when silence becomes truth, and when legacy walks back in, not to fight, but to remind us what we stand for. If you're ready for a story that will shake your heart and sharpen your spirit, stay right here. Because what you're about to witness isn't a fight, it's a lesson. The echo of bare feet brushed lightly against the padded mat, a quiet rhythm pulsing through the dojo in Sierra Glen, California, like wind through tall grass. Afternoon light spilled through high rectangular windows, painting golden stripes across the polished floor. The walls were lined with dusty trophies and faded black and white photographs of men mid-air frozen in mid-kick or locked in ceremonial bows. It was the kind of martial arts studio where legacy dripped from every wooden beam, but not necessarily kindness. Coach Trent Beckett's voice sliced the air like a blade, each command sharp and final. Form 1. Line. Begin. 30. Students moved in synchronization, fists shooting forward like arrows, feet stomping with precision. But amid the echo and exertion, there was one girl, Dalton, who moved differently. Not better, not louder, just quieter, sharper, as if her body was telling a story the others hadn't yet learned to read. She didn't move to impress. She moved like she remembered something everyone else forgot. Her breathing was steady, measured. Her punches didn't shout, they landed like punctuation in a sentence only she knew how to finish. A few kids noticed. One boy in the back, Liam, paused mid-form, blinking at the precision of her stance. "Whoa," he muttered, not meaning to be heard. Where'd she learn that? Someone giggled behind him. "Maybe YouTube." Another whispered, "She just got here already, thinks she's special." Arya heard it all. Didn't flinch, didn't turn. She finished the sequence, stepped back into line, and bowed like nothing had happened. But inside her heart ticked faster, not with fear, but with something older, something she'd been trying to leave behind. Dalton Beckett called out. His tone carried the kind of clipped sharpness that made your stomach twist before you even knew why. Arya blinked. "Yes, sir," she answered, stepping forward. Beckett, tall, lean, mid-40s, with a jaw that always looked clenched and arms folded tight across his black belt, tilted his head. "That sequence you just performed, who taught you that?" Arya paused, just a second too long. "My grandfather," she said. The room quieted a little. Your grandfather, Beckett echoed the words hanging in the air like a test. "Yes," she replied, voice even, but barely above a whisper. "He taught me traditional forms. He used to be a champion. Before I joined this class." A snort came from the left. "Okay, story time," a girl mumbled. Another boy grinned. "So what was your grandpa, Bruce Lee or something?" No, Arya said calmly. "His name's Jackson Dalton, but people used to call him Jax the Quiet Storm." The room froze, then exploded in chuckles. That old urban legend, someone laughed. "Didn't he disappear after the 90s? He's probably a janitor somewhere." "Yeah, right, like that guy's your grandpa." Beckett didn't laugh. He stepped closer, his boots pressing into the mat like he wanted them to leave a mark. "You say your grandfather was Jax Dalton," he repeated. "Yes, sir," Arya replied. That was all? Beckett studied her for a long moment. The silence stretched uncomfortable. Then, "Do you think this is funny?" he asked. She shook her head. "Do you think invoking some long-forgotten fighter's name earns you something here?" "I didn't mean to." "You disrespected the curriculum," he cut in coldly. "We don't teach fantasy. This dojo is built on discipline, honesty. You owe your classmates an apology." Arya looked around. Faces stared back, some amused, some blank, some expectant. She swallowed, voice thin but clear. "I didn't lie." Beckett's face didn't move. "Louder," he demanded. "Say it so everyone hears you." Her spine straightened. "I didn't lie," she said again this time, louder. And then it happened, a sound so sudden it cracked the room in half. Beckett's open palm struck her cheek, hard. The slap echoed like gunfire in silence. Time froze, breath caught. Even the fluorescent lights above seemed to flicker, afraid to respond. Arya's face turned slightly, her eyes wide open, lips parted not in pain, not in shock, but in something harder to name, something like betrayal wrapped in bone. She didn't cry, didn't speak, just clenched her fists until her knuckles turned white. No one moved, no one helped. It was as if the whole class had collectively agreed to forget what they saw the moment it happened. Beckett's voice returned low and firm, back in line. Arya nodded once. No tears, no words. Just turned slowly and walked back to her spot. Every footstep sounded like thunder now, not because she stomped, but because no one else dared make a sound, and class continued, or at least pretended to. But something had broken, not in Arya, in the air itself. She left quietly that day, duffel bag slung over one shoulder, the other burning. The sidewalk felt like fire beneath her sneakers, and her breath came in shallow bursts as she pedaled her bike home. Not from pain, but from something worse, the knowledge that everyone saw and no one cared. The burn on her face wasn't just from the slap, it was from the invisible silence that followed, the echo of cowardice, the quiet acceptance that somehow, maybe she deserved it. Words spiraled in her head like wasps. Attention seeker, liar, fantasy freak. She blinked fast, didn't cry, just kept moving faster now, as if speed could peel the shame off her skin. By the time she reached the crooked wooden gate of the old White House with sunburnt shutters, the world had grown too loud inside her and too quiet outside. She dropped her bike in the grass and walked up the porch steps. Didn't knock, didn't call out. The door creaked open before she could reach it. Her grandfather was already there. Jackson Jax Dalton, bare-armed, weathered, standing in faded jeans and a threadbare t-shirt, watering flower beds like it was the only war left worth fighting. His hair was white now, but his posture still sharp. He looked at her, not the bag, not the shoes, just her face. And then the red mark, the shape of a hand. His own hand slowly lowered from the hose. "You're home early," he said. Not gently, not coldly, just like it mattered. Arya didn't answer. She stood on the porch sunlight, baking her arms, waiting for judgment, comfort, anything. But Jax didn't ask what happened, didn't lecture, didn't console. Instead, he turned, walked into the house, and left the screen door swinging behind him. Arya followed. Inside, the kitchen smelled like lemon tea and cedar. He poured 2 glasses of water, slid one across to her, then reached into the drawer, pulled out a photo, an old one, faded at the corners. She was 6 braces missing teeth, beaming awkwardly beside him, at a tournament, both in wrinkled white GIs, standing before a hand-painted banner. He didn't explain, just laid it on the table and sat back. "They laughed," she said at last. Her voice barely moved air. Then she hesitated. "He hit me." Jax looked at her for a long time, unmoving. Then calmly, "Different makes people nervous. It always has." Another long silence settled between them. Finally, he rose again, walked to a wooden cabinet and retrieved something, a black belt, old and worn, folded carefully like a relic. He placed it beside the photo, not offering it, just letting it exist between them. "You're not here to prove anything," he said, "but you should know how to stand even when the floor disappears." His voice wasn't soft, it wasn't stern, it was steady, like the echo of years in someone who'd been forgotten by the spotlight, but not by the truth. Arya nodded once, then again, and that night, she didn't sleep. The fan spun lazily above her, casting long, sleepy shadows on the ceiling. The blades creaked with each rotation, like an old clock marking time that refused to move. Arya Dalton lay still beneath her blanket, eyes wide open, the stinging heat on her cheek, replaced by a quiet heaviness lodged somewhere beneath her ribs. The kind of weight that didn't bruise skin, it bruised identity. She hadn't spoken since dinner, not because she couldn't, but because there was nothing to say that hadn't already burned itself into the space between words. Down the hall, her grandfather's room remained dim. Jax Dalton, legend ghost gardener, hadn't asked her anything over their meal. No questions, no fury, no, "What were you thinking?" Instead, he'd watched her like someone reading a book he knew by heart, waiting for her to flip the page herself. She'd sat with her hands in her lap, barely touching the roast chicken he made from memory. Every time she looked up, his gaze was calm, unreadable. It unnerved her more than the slap ever did. She wanted him to say something, to tell her she was brave, that the coach was wrong, that it was okay to cry. But Jax Dalton had never been a man of many words. His silence wasn't absence, it was presence waiting for purpose. And so, she ate in silence, slept in silence, bled in silence. At dawn, she finally gave up on sleep and slipped out of bed, feet bare against the cool wooden floor. Her reflection in the hallway mirror startled her, not because of the red mark that had faded into a faint blush of memory, but because of her eyes. They looked older, not wiser, just tired. She padded quietly toward the porch, but Jax was already outside. Of course he was. The man didn't believe in sleeping past responsibility. His boots tapped softly against the stone walkway as he raked leaves off the garden path. She paused in the doorway. The light was pale and gold, casting long shadows from the flower beds he had tended for years. His body moved like a metronome, scrape, lift, pull, not rushed, not slow, just centered. "You're up early," she said. He didn't look over. "You slept late," he replied. She stepped off the porch, wrapping her arms around herself. "About yesterday," she began. Jax cut her off with a nod toward the backyard. "You hungry?" Arya blinked. "A little." He set the rake down. "Good. Then you can train before breakfast." That was his way. Not lectures, not apologies, just motion. They walked 10 steps past the flower bed, where a square of lawn had been clipped short, not for show, but for use. At one end, a wooden post leaned slightly to the left, weathered from years of fists and kicks. It had no markings, no belt, no banner, but the earth beneath it remembered every strike. Jax rolled his shoulders, cracking them one by one, like unwinding a clock. "You remember the 3?" he asked. Arya nodded. "Breathing form, sidestep, pivot for balance." He raised an eyebrow. "That's 2.5. She smiled faintly. The 3rd was always the hardest to explain. He grunted approval. "Still in you." "I never forgot them," she said. "I just didn't know if they mattered in a place like that." He didn't respond, not with words, just turned and gestured toward the grass. "Show me the first one, slow." She stepped forward unsure at first, not because she'd lost the form, but because something inside her was still unsure if she had the right to remember it. But muscle memory spoke louder than doubt. She moved, not to perform, but to feel. Each breath was intentional, each shift in weight deliberate. Her fists didn't tremble, they anchored. Jax circled her like wind, quiet, steady watching. When she finished, he nodded once, again, faster. She began again, sharper this time. The old rhythm returned. Her feet knew where to land before her mind finished thinking. When she landed the last strike, a palm heel thrust, Jax held up a hand. "That's enough." Arya exhaled, chest rising, not from exhaustion, from awakening. Jax stepped forward, pulled the black belt from his pocket. It was folded neatly, edges, worn threads, frayed from years of quiet battles. He didn't hand it to her, just set it on the leaning post. Arya stared. "I'm not ready to wear that," she said. "You're not supposed to be," he replied. She waited for more. He didn't explain. Jax never did speeches, but after a moment he looked at her, steady, quiet, full of gravity. "Honor isn't what you carry," he said. "It's what you stand on when everything else breaks." Her throat caught. "Just for a second. What if they still think I lied?" she asked. Jax adjusted his old army green cap, squinting into the rising sun. "Then maybe they need to see the truth in motion." She didn't fully understand what that meant, not yet. But she nodded anyway. He tapped the post once. "We eat in 20. Be faster than the eggs." She almost laughed. Almost. He turned back toward the house. Arya stayed where she was, letting the sunlight dry the sweat on her forehead. She looked at the belt again. It didn't feel like it belonged to her. Not yet. But maybe that didn't matter. Because tomorrow he would walk beside her. And if the world still thought she made everything up, then the world was about to receive one hell of a reminder. The sun was already climbing when Arya and her grandfather walked across the parking lot of Sierra Glen Martial Arts Academy. The concrete radiated heat beneath their soles, but Arya barely felt it. Her heart was pounding too loud, too deep. She kept her pace steady even as her chest tightened with every step closer to the doors. Same building, same students inside, but nothing about it felt the same. She wore her jai sleeves crisp and clean belt tied with the quiet precision of ritual. Her grandfather, by contrast, looked like he had no business being there, dark jeans, tucked in olive shirt, boots heavy with time, and that old weathered hat that shaded his eyes like a curtain over a legend. He didn't walk fast. He didn't walk slow. He walked like the ground bent slightly to his rhythm. Calm, centered, impossible to ignore. Arya didn't speak, neither did he. As they approached the doors, she could already hear the sounds of warm-ups inside, sneakers squeaking on mats, belts snapping during kicks, laughter from the far side of the gym. But then the door creaked open, and the first few heads turned. The laughter stopped. A whisper cut the air. "Wait, is that him? No way. That's not... Looks like someone's grandpa came to bring lunch. Nah, that's gotta be a stunt double." Coach Trent Beckett, already on the mat, tightening his belt, froze mid-knot. His jaw shifted slightly. Then he clapped his hands. "Everyone line up. Let's get started." His voice was sharp, commanding, but behind the bravado, something had flickered recognition or caution, maybe even nerves. Then he turned toward Arya and the man beside her, and guests, he added coolly, are welcome to observe from the bleachers. His tone was clipped polite, but unmistakably dismissive. Arya stepped forward and bowed slightly. "He's not here to watch," she said. Her voice was steady. "He's here because you asked me who taught me what I know, and I told you the truth. And you hit me for it." A murmur swept through the line. A few heads turned toward Beckett, uncertain. Beckett's eyes narrowed. His voice lowered tight with control. "I told you this dojo is built on discipline, not on stories, not on claims of legacy that belong in comic books." That's when her grandfather finally spoke. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was like gravel that had been polished by decades. "You struck her," he said, almost conversational, "for saying who her family is." Beckett folded his arms. "I disciplined her for lying." He didn't blink. "And how exactly would you know?" The man in the hat tilted his head slightly. "Because he said taking one slow step forward, I'm the lie you're talking about." Silence. Deep, thick, stunned silence. And then a bark of laughter from the back. "Bro, that's not him." "Yeah, okay, sure. Jack's the quiet storm, just walked in here like it's casual Tuesday. He looks like he sells lawnmowers." Beckett raised his hands theatrically, turning to the class. "You see, this is what I'm talking about. Performance, drama. We're here to train, not to role play." He turned back to Jax, stepping in close now, just a few feet away. "So, what you expect me to bow? Apologize. You want me to tell the kids bedtime stories about glory days in the 80s. Jax didn't answer right away. He looked down at the mat, then up at the kids watching, and finally back at Beckett. His tone was even. "You've taught them how to hit hard, but you never taught them how to stand for something." Beckett chuckled under his breath. "So what now, old man?" he muttered. "You want to spar?" Jax's voice remained calm. "You want to prove something he said, not me." Beckett pointed to the center of the mat. "Then let's go." Arya's stomach clenched. She turned quickly to her grandfather. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. "Not for me." But Jax was already walking, slowly, steadily toward the center of the mat. He slipped off his jacket. Underneath was a plain gray t-shirt. His frame was lean but solid, not a brawler's bulk, a warrior's balance. The kind of build you earn after 30 years of fighting things no one else sees. Beckett rolled his neck, cracking it loudly. He bowed. Jax didn't bow back. Instead, he looked at the room and said quietly, "I don't fight to win. I fight to remind people what's worth standing up for." Someone in the back whispered, "Wait, what if it is him? Shh, just watch." Beckett lunged first. He was fast, no one doubted that. Years younger, years meaner. His first strikes came sharp jab, spinning back fist roundhouse to the ribs. Jax blocked the first, sidestepped the second, absorbed the third with a grunt. It looked like he was on defense, like maybe he was in trouble. See, someone whispered, "He's losing, probably just a guy in costume." And then the shift. Jax's weight dropped, his hips turned. The next block wasn't a defense, it was a trap. He caught Beckett's wrist, mid-strike, pivoted, redirected his momentum with surgical precision. A ridge hand landed on Beckett's collarbone. Then a low sweep knocked his footing just enough. And finally a roundhouse. Clean. Controlled. It landed sharp against Beckett's side and dropped him. Hard. No one breathed. Jax stood still, not panting, not sweating, just steady. Beckett groaned, rolled to his knees. Jax looked down at him, voice low. "This wasn't for me. It was for her." Then he turned to Arya. She didn't move, didn't speak, but her eyes shimmered. and for the first time since yesterday, the world was looking at her, and no one was laughing. The silence that followed was unlike any silence Arya had ever heard. It wasn't quiet, it was stunned, suspended thick with disbelief and something new creeping in respect. Coach Trent Beckett, once untouchable, once smug in his dominance, now knelt on the mat, clutching his side as the man he had dismissed as a myth stood over him without a word of triumph, no fist in the air, no gloating, just stillness, the kind that said, "Lesson delivered." The students didn't move. Phones that had once buzzed with laughter now shook with the instinct to record something they'd never forget. And in the back, one whispered, "That was it." The roundhouse, while another replied, "No." That was him. Jax Dalton didn't speak to the room. He didn't need to. He turned to Arya, and their eyes met hers, still wide stunned, full of disbelief, and something burning beneath pride, belonging vindication. He nodded once. It was enough. Then he turned back to Beckett, who tried to stand but staggered winded, not just from the strikes, but from the realization that the ground he ruled no longer belonged to him. This wasn't for pride, Jax said, his voice quiet, but clear, carrying through the stunned air like a blade through silk. It was for her, and for every student who's been taught to bow before they've been taught to listen. Then, with no further ceremony, he bent down, picked up his jacket, and walked off the mat. No applause followed. Only silence, the kind that doesn't demand respect, but earns it. Beckett stayed where he was, his breathing ragged, not from injury, but from what it meant. Around them, the students, some who had mocked, some who had doubted, stood still. And for the first time, no one looked at Arya like a liar, a joke, or a ghost chasing shadows. They looked at her like someone they hadn't really seen before, someone who hadn't flinched, who hadn't backed down, who had shown up today not to fight, but to be seen. The room felt different now. The very mat felt different, as if the echoes of what just happened had sunk into the floor itself and would never leave. And that was when the first video went online, a 12-second clip, no captions, no intro. Just the moment Beckett hit the ground and Jax Dalton stood above him like a relic carved from time and principle. It didn't go viral right away. It wasn't flashy enough, but within hours it had been reposted, shared, captioned. "This your grandpa after yoga," one post joked. Another said, "Bro thinks he's in a Western." But then came the second clip, longer, clearer, showing the slap, the silence, the girl who didn't cry, the man who didn't posture the fight, that didn't erupt but unfolded with purpose. And this time, the caption read, "He said, I don't hit children, but I protect them." That changed everything. Martial arts pages began sharing it. Veteran instructors broke down the moves frame by frame, praising not the speed, but the restraint. One Brazilian black belt called it the most honorable takedown in a decade. A military veteran posted, "That man didn't fight out of ego, he fought out of legacy." The hashtags rolled in, Schuster Justice for Area, Jans Jax Dalton returns, or Respect I cerned Busby's truth, in silence. At home, Arya sat in bed, brushing her hair when her phone buzzed. She stared at the screen, hundreds of messages, hundreds of shares. DMs from strangers. One read, "I was there. I'm sorry. We laughed. I didn't know the whole thing." Another, "You were right. I showed this to my dad. He said your grandpa is a legend." One message from someone with no profile picture simply said, "I got kicked out of my dojo for calling out my coach. I cried watching this. Thank you." Arya's hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from something lifting all the heat, the humiliation, the shame that had settled into her skin was finally rising like steam. Her eyes welled, but didn't spill. Then another message. "You didn't scream. You didn't complain. You just stood there. And now everyone hears you." She didn't reply. She just read and kept reading like every line peeled off another layer of doubt. In the hallway, the light beneath her grandfather's door was still on. He didn't sleep early. Maybe he hadn't slept at all. She placed the phone down, walked quietly to the door, and peeked into the kitchen. He was there standing by the stove, pouring hot water into an old ceramic mug. He didn't turn but asked, "You saw it?" She nodded. "It's everywhere." He leaned on the counter, holding the mug in both hands. "They'll talk about it for a few days," he said. "Then they'll find something else to yell about." Arya looked at him, searching. "Are you mad they filmed it?" He paused, then shook his head. "No." "Why not?" she asked. He finally looked up. "Because the people who needed to see it saw it." She nodded slowly, letting that sink in. It's weird, she said. People texting me now. People who didn't care before. Jax gave the faintest smile. People don't listen to words. They watch action. She folded her arms. I was scared, she admitted. So was I, he said. She blinked. You didn't look scared? Acting, he replied. I used to do it professionally. She laughed not loudly, not even fully, but it was the first sound that didn't carry pain since the slap. As he turned toward the hallway, he added, Get some rest. Tomorrow will be louder. She watched him go, then walked back to her room. Her phone buzzed again, but she ignored it. On her dresser, the old black belt sat folded beside her phone. She picked it up, held it in both hands. Still heavy. Still sacred. She wasn't ready to wear it. But maybe now for the first time she understood what it meant. By morning, the dojo didn't feel like the same place. The walls looked the same. The mats hadn't moved, but the air carried a tension that hadn't been there before. Like something unspoken had woven itself into the floor overnight, and everyone who stepped in could feel it pressing just beneath the surface. The staff walked faster, quieter, with clipped voices and darting glances, while students in the courtyard kept glancing from their phones up to the main door, their expressions bouncing somewhere between curiosity, unease, and disbelief, like trying to reconcile two versions of a person. They thought they knew the girl they had laughed at, and the girl now featured in a video approaching 8 million views. The district coordinator arrived earlier than usual, not with a clipboard and smile like normal, but with tight shoulders, stiff posture, and the kind of expression people wore when they'd spent a night reading emails they never expected to exist. She didn't say, "Good morning," didn't stop for coffee, just walked straight into the admin office and closed the door behind her. Arya arrived quietly through the side entrance, her GI crisp but not new, her face calm but not unreadable. She bowed to the mat as she always did and took her place near the back just like before, but this time the silence around her wasn't dismissal. It was anticipation. She didn't need to look to know eyes were on her, but she didn't flinch, didn't shrink. She just stood taller, her shoulders square, her gaze steady. One of the students near her, a boy named Damien, who had once smirked when she said Jax Dalton, leaned toward her slightly and whispered just loud enough for her to hear, "You were right." She didn't turn, didn't nod, didn't even blink, but the corner of her mouth twitched, barely visible, the ghost of a reply. Meanwhile, in the admin office, Coach Trent Beckett stood across from the coordinator, and the principal arms crossed his jaw. Tight eyes locked on the iPad in front of them. The full video played no edits, no music, no memes, just the cold, undeniable sequence: Arya being slapped, the silence that followed the door opening, Jax stepping in the sparring match, the fall. No one said a word during the playback. No one interrupted. The clip ended. The principal, voice calm but pointed, asked, "Do you think what happened was acceptable?" Beckett didn't answer immediately. He stared at the frozen frame on screen, himself on the ground, Jack standing over him like an unspoken verdict, and for a moment he looked like a man searching for a version of the story where he didn't look guilty. "I was enforcing discipline," he said. The coordinator raised an eyebrow. Including striking a student in the face, Beckett opened his mouth, then closed it. There was no version of this where he walked out clean. Not when the video had crossed borders, been translated, broken down by black belts in Tokyo, praised in Facebook groups by retired SEALs, quoted in forums by teachers in Canada. Not when the silence that followed that slap had become a statement louder than any defense he could muster. "Are you asking me to resign?" he said finally, voice dry. No one answered directly. They didn't need to. The resignation letter was signed within the hour. Back on the mat, a substitute instructor had taken his place, younger, softer spoken, clearly nervous about stepping into a room that had just become a battlefield. He started stretches called for warm-ups, but the tension didn't break. Then one of the older students, a tall boy named Quinn, raised his hand. The coach hesitated. "Can I say something?" Quinn asked. The coach glanced at the office, then stepped aside. Quinn walked to the front, faced the class, and said, "Yesterday wasn't about karate." A few heads tilted. He cleared his throat. "I mean, we thought we were here to learn kicks, drills, tournament prep. But we weren't learning the real thing. Not really." He looked down, then up again. "He made us feel like if we didn't hit hard enough, we didn't matter. If we asked questions, we were weak." Another student stood, a girl named Brielle. "He told me to punch harder. even when I was crying. More students followed, not shouting, not dramatic, just quiet truths spoken aloud for the first time. He said respect was earned through pain. He told me my story didn't matter. Someone picked up a marker, walked to the whiteboard, and wrote, "Respect is not fear." No one erased it. Arya didn't speak. She didn't need to. When it was time to begin drills, the coach asked if anyone wanted to lead warm-ups. 3 students turned to Arya. She blinked, surprised, unsure. Then she stepped forward, took her place at the front, and said with clarity, "Let's start with breathing." And they did. A week passed, but the air in Sierra Glen still held the weight of what had happened. Not the kind of weight that crushed, but the kind that lingered, settled into the corners of things, into quiet conversations. The curve of someone's glance, the pause before a name was spoken. The headlines had cooled. The social media posts had slowed. The hashtags dipped below trending. But the dojo had changed, not in decor or structure, but in the silence, the respect. The eyes that watched each other with something closer to awareness. The substitute instructor stayed on, gentle but firm, still unsure of whether to lead or simply hold space. And for most students that was enough, because for the first time they didn't feel like they had to prove their worth with noise. Arya kept coming. She arrived early, left. Late never said more than necessary. But something about the way she tied her belt or moved across the mat made the air around her feel steadier. She never brought up the slap, never referenced the fight. She didn't need to. The room remembered for her. One afternoon during a break, a younger student, maybe 9, maybe 10, walked up to her clutching something small in his hand. He didn't say anything right away, just stood there, eyes downcast, until finally he mumbled, "I wrote a note." Arya blinked, reached out. He handed her a folded piece of notebook paper, edges frayed. She opened it slowly. Inside, in the uneven handwriting of a child, were 3 words, "I believe you." She didn't cry, she didn't speak. Just folded it back, nodded once, and slipped it into her uniform. No one saw her place it later that night in a small box under her pillow, alongside a crumpled photo of her and Jax from years ago, both in oversized uniforms, both smiling like they hadn't yet learned the weight of silence. The following morning, Jax was in the hallway carrying a box of old gear, shin guards, hand wraps, training mitts faded from use, when Arya stepped out of her room, holding something in both hands. "Wait!" she called out. He turned. She stood still, then stepped forward and held out the object, the old black belt he had laid beside the post. It was still folded, still, worn, still waiting. "I think I'm ready now," she said, voice barely more than breath. He stepped closer, looked down at the belt, then at her. And then, with that familiar small smile, the one that held more weight than words ever could, he said simply, "No." Arya frowned, confused. "No?" But Jax didn't take the belt, didn't reach for it, just looked her in the eyes and replied, "You already were." She didn't answer. She couldn't. Her throat caught for just a second, and by the time she looked back up, he was already halfway down the hall, boots thudding softly on old wood. She stood there for a long time after he'd gone, then turned, walked back into her room, opened the closet, pulled out a simple wooden shadow box from the bottom shelf, and placed the folded belt inside. Beside it, she added the note, the one with 3 words. Then she closed the glass, sealed it shut, and set it near the window where the light would hit it just right in the morning. She didn't hang it. She didn't display it. She didn't need to. Because she finally understood honor wasn't something you wore. It was something you passed on. At the edge of Sierra Glen, where the paved streets gave way to cracked sidewalks and chain-link fences lined forgotten baseball fields, a small community center stood beneath the arching limbs of a crooked oak tree, its bricks sun-bleached and its sign half-faded, barely legible. But inside, something was starting, not with fireworks or flyers, not with sponsors or schedules, but with breath and intention and a girl who no longer needed permission to lead. The center hadn't planned for it. Not officially, not on any bulletin board or website calendar, but after word spread that Arya Dalton was still teaching. Not for tournaments, not for trophies, but for truth. A few parents started bringing their kids every Saturday morning, curious, at first uncertain, waiting to see if the whispers were real. There were no mats, just grass worn flat from years of use. No rows of chairs, just dirt and a few tree stumps. No sound system or scoreboard. Just the rhythm of feet and breath, and the occasional hum of wind through the oak above. Arya wore her GI same one as always, Sleeves slightly rolled her posture as quiet and centered as the man who once trained her under the same kind of sky. She didn't talk much, didn't need to, because her presence was already a kind of answer. The way she moved with both precision and patience, the way she helped a smaller kid adjust their stance without a word. The way she made every mistake feel like part of the process, rather than something to fear. Nearby, under the shade of the tree, Jack sat on a bench, arms crossed, hat tilted low, watching, not evaluating, not supervising, just witnessing, like a craftsman watching a torch being handed off to someone who didn't need to be told how to hold it. Most of the kids didn't even know who he was to them. He was just the quiet old man, with boots too heavy for summer. But the way Arya glanced at him after each demonstration, the way her back straightened when she heard the faint scrape of his chair against the dirt, told a story that didn't need words. Drills were slow, deliberate, nothing flashy, just practice repetition. Balance, breath, and when one of the younger girls asked Arya where she'd learned to move like that, she smiled and said, "From someone who never yelled." But everyone listened to him anyway, and the girl nodded, like she understood, even if she didn't yet have the words to explain why. Later, one of the boys slipped during a sidekick, landed hard on the grass, and sat there blinking back tears. Arya didn't rush to him, didn't fuss, just walked over, knelt beside him, and repeated the move slowly by his side until he copied her. His second attempt, wobbled his third, held steady. And after the fourth, she simply said, "Better," then stood and moved on. It wasn't a ceremony. There were no belts handed out, no applause at the end. But when the final bow came and the group disbanded slowly, some laughing, some lingering, a few of the younger ones ran back to her and asked Will. There'd be class next week, and she answered same time, same place, and they grinned like that was all the confirmation they needed. Near the tree line, a woman from the community board had arrived midway through the session, said little, took a few notes, then walked over to Jack's during cleanup and asked if he'd consider mentoring a youth leadership program. Through the center, he didn't commit, just nodded once and said, "We'll see," then turned back to the field, where Arya was helping pack up water bottles and notebooks into a cracked plastic bin. She didn't hear the whole conversation, but when she looked over and saw the way the woman glanced at her, not with pity, not with curiosity, but with something quieter, deeper, like someone who'd finally seen the answer to a question they hadn't known how to ask. She felt something shift in her chest, something like possibility without pressure, like belonging without explanation. As the sun began to dip behind the hill and the last car pulled out of the gravel parking lot, Arya stood alone on the grass looking up at the branches above, and for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel like she was still trying to prove she belonged here. She knew. It was after the fourth weekend session, long after the last kid had been picked up, after the gear had been stored in the community center's rusting lockers, after the echoes of laughter had faded into the dusk, that Arya lingered by the edge of the field, hands on her hips, eyes scanning the grass where footprints still formed shallow memories in the dirt. She was about to head back toward the parking lot where her bike leaned against the fence when she noticed a boy still standing alone under the oak tree, small, maybe 10, with mismatched socks and a backpack too large for his frame. His eyes locked on his shoes like they might tell him what to say. Arya walked over slowly, not wanting to startle him, and paused a few feet away, waiting. The boy finally looked up, swallowed hard, then held out a crumpled piece of notebook paper, not a clean page, not something prepared, just the kind of scrap someone tears in a hurry when they need to say something before courage disappears. Arya took it, gently looked down, then unfolded it with care, expecting a thank you. Maybe a question about class, but inside, in crooked pencil letters that slanted off the lines, were the words, "I want to be brave like you." She blinked once, then again, but didn't say anything right away. Not because she didn't know how to respond, but because there was something sacred about silence. When it followed truth, she folded the note again, held it in both hands, then looked at him and said softly, "You already are," and his face lit up in that shy, sideways way only kids know how to smile. Then he nodded, turned and ran off toward the lot, where a tired-looking woman waved from a dented car with one missing hubcap. Arya stood still, note in hand, breath caught somewhere between awe and humility, because that boy hadn't seen her in a dojo, hadn't seen the fight, the slap, the video he'd only seen, who she was when no one was watching, and somehow that meant more than all the views in the world. She placed the note in her back pocket like it was something breakable, something ancient, and walked her bike home through the warm twilight, the pedals clicking softly beneath her, the wind tugging gently at her sleeves. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like a student trying to catch up. She felt like a beginning wrapped in motion. That night, she found the old black belt still resting inside the wooden shadow box beside her window, the sunlight from earlier having left a faint glow across the glass, and though she didn't open, it didn't remove the belt. She added something new. The crumpled note from the boy, now folded flat, slid beside the belt like a seal. She stepped back, looked at it, the belt, the photo of her and Jax, the note, and realized the box didn't hold proof anymore. It held memory, promise, lineage. It was no longer a trophy case, it was a lantern. Down the hall, she heard the creak of floorboards as Jax moved about, probably reading in his chair by the kitchen, maybe sipping old tea, maybe waiting not for her, but for the world to keep catching up to what he already knew. She padded out barefoot, turned the corner, saw him exactly as expected, worn flannel reading glasses low on his nose, the same ceramic cup in hand. And she didn't speak, just sat across from him, pulling her knees to her chest. For a while they said nothing, the silence between them as natural as breath, until finally Jax looked up and asked, "Good class?" She nodded. "Yeah." He smiled slightly. "They still listening?" "Even when I'm not talking," she replied. He sipped his tea, eyes twinkling. "Then you're teaching right." She leaned back in the chair, looking up at the ceiling, where the light flickered gently, and somewhere deep in her chest, past the ache, past the fire, past the bruise that had long since faded, she realized she didn't just feel strong anymore, she felt real. By Monday morning, the number was 20 million. Not that Arya had been counting, but the view counter on the full-length video had climbed higher than she'd ever seen on anything not involving celebrities or scandals. And this time, it wasn't just about a slap or a roundhouse or a name, once whispered like myth. It was about the way the room had gone still, the way silence had become a language, the way a girl who refused to lower her voice had taught the internet how to listen again. The comments flooded in like rain, slow at first, then relentless, former students, instructors, parents, people who had never stepped foot in a dojo, writing things like, "I wish I had spoken up when I was her age," or "My daughter watched this and said, she wants to train with Arya, and even I didn't know how much I needed this until I cried in front of my screen." And somehow, that hit Arya harder than the original impact had, because now her voice wasn't just her own. It was the echo of everyone who had ever been, silenced, doubted, dismissed. At school, she passed through hallways. She used to drift through invisible, but now eyes followed her, not out of mockery, not even out of curiosity, but with a kind of reverence that made her shoulders feel heavier, like carrying a story everyone now expected her to keep telling. In the cafeteria, students who once laughed when she mentioned Jax now sat near her, not quite brave enough to speak, but close enough to listen, and sometimes that was louder than words. During lunch, she opened her phone to find a message from a journalist requesting an interview, a martial arts podcast, asking for her insight on generational discipline, and a training center in Texas, offering to fly her and her grandfather out for a guest seminar. She stared at the screen, overwhelmed, fingers hovering above the reply button, but unable to move, because some part of her still felt like the girl who walked home that day with her face burning and no one to walk beside her. Later that evening, she sat on the back porch dusk, curling at the edge of the garden like a blanket. The scent of tomato vines thick in the air when Jax joined her, carrying 2 mugs of something warm. She took one without a word, sipped, let the silence stretch between them like thread on a loom, and finally said, "It's still happening. The video, the messages, the posts." Jax nodded, leaned back, watched a firefly blink against the dying light. "It'll slow down," he said. "People get loud, then they get distracted. But what do I do with it?" "Now?" she asked. He didn't answer right away, just tilted his head studying the horizon, like the answer might be hiding in the outline of the hills. "You keep showing up," he said. "That's all you ever needed to do." She stared down into her cup, the steam curling up like a whisper, and realized he wasn't telling her to chase it. The attention, the headlines, the applause. He was reminding her that the work, the breath, the movement, they had always come first. She stayed on the porch long after he'd gone in, long after the crickets began their evening symphony, long after the light over the community center clicked off across town, and thought about the boy who gave her the note, the teacher who tried to silence her, the friends who now sat closer in the dojo without knowing why, and somewhere in all of it, she understood that the world didn't just hear her because of the slap or the fight or the belt they heard her, because she never once raised her voice, and still never backed down. By the end of that week, the dojo mat, the same one where Arya had once stood in silence, cheek-burning fists clenched, and dignity intact, felt different beneath her feet. Not because anything had changed in its design or placement, but because every fiber of it now carried memory, like the canvas had absorbed the sound of her refusal to lie, the thunder of a legend's footwork, the shift in the breath of every student who had once laughed and now listened. Coach Beckett's name was gone from the whiteboard, replaced by interim lead coach Willard, written in neat black marker, and though the gear rack still had his initials on one of the bags, no one dared move it. No one touched his focus. Mitts or pads, they remained untouched in the corner, like relics of a past era. Everyone had silently agreed to leave behind. When Arya entered that Friday, she didn't do anything dramatic, didn't walk taller, didn't speak louder. She simply bowed to the mat and took her place in the second row, just as she always had, and yet somehow the energy shifted around her. Heads turned, shoulders squared, eyes followed, not with spectacle but with calibration, like compasses realigning to true north after spinning too long in circles. Drills began led by the interim coach, who, younger, more reserved, watched the students closely, as if unsure whether to command or cooperate, and about halfway through the class, he asked, "Would anyone like to lead a sequence?" And though a few hands rose hesitantly, 3 students turned to look at Arya without saying a word. She hadn't expected it, hadn't planned for it, but the way they waited, not pushing, not pressuring, told her what they couldn't articulate. That leadership wasn't something you claimed. It was something you became when the moment called. So she stepped forward, heart-steady breath, measured, and led them through the breathing form, slow-focused, grounded. The very form Beckett had once questioned, had once mocked, and now followed by the class with reverence. Each movement felt deeper, like her limbs weren't just remembering the technique but the reasons behind it. The years beside Jack's, the early mornings, the quiet corrections, the lessons whispered through repetition. When she finished, the coach said nothing, just nodded once, but it was enough. After class, she sat on the edge of the mat, retying her belt, when a girl she barely knew sat beside her and asked softly, "Were you scared?" Arya didn't answer right away. She looked at her hands, at the calluses across her knuckles, at the fraying ends of her belt, then said, "Yes." The girl looked surprised. Then, "How did you not back down?" Arya gave a half smile. Backing down and being scared aren't the same thing. The girl nodded slowly, like she needed to sit with that. Arya didn't offer more. Some truths have to land in silence to take root. Later that night after dinner, she found Jax in the garage digging through a stack of old sparring gear dust, rising in clouds around him, and she asked, "What are you doing?" without really needing to. Because when she saw the worn pads, the target shields with faded logos, the battered kicking dummy, she understood. He looked up, shrugged. Figured if you're gonna teach, you might as well have tools that remember how it's done. She leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "You think they'll keep coming?" He smiled slightly. "They don't come for the gear." She looked around the garage, at the posters curled at the corners, at the faded medals, the trophies missing plates, and realized how much of his life had been packed into this small space, not preserved in glory, but tucked away like memories that didn't need to be displayed to stay real. "You're not going to get back in the ring, are you?" she asked with a teasing grin. "Only if you're foolish enough to challenge me," he replied. They both laughed, the kind of laughter that doesn't echo but fills the ribs. That night, Arya slept with the window cracked open, the spring breeze carrying in the scent of grass and dust. And when she dreamed, it wasn't of the slap or the fight or the silence. It was of a small mat beneath a tree and a group of kids moving in rhythm, following her without needing to be told why. When she woke, the first light of morning painted the edge of the shadow box, where the black belt lay beside a note folded 3 times. And outside in the yard, her grandfather was already sweeping the path like he'd never stopped. It was late afternoon when Arya stood in the small clearing behind the community center, the grass freshly cut, the heat of the day lingering just above the ground, like a breath held too long, and in front of her were 17 students, some barefoot, some in sneakers, all at different levels of skill, but every single one of them was watching her with the kind of attention that came not from admiration, but from trust. She didn't give speeches before class. That wasn't how Jax taught her. She simply nodded, took her place, and moved, first letting her breath set the rhythm, her shoulders set the pace, her stillness speak louder than a command, and slowly, like birds joining a current, they followed. That day they worked on balance, not just in their stances, but in their presence, learning how to feel weight shift between heel and toe, how to stay upright without being rigid, how to fall and rise without apology. After the session, while a few of the kids helped gather pads and water bottles, one boy lingered, a quiet kid named Elliot, who hadn't spoken much since joining. He walked up to Arya, not looking her in the eye, and said, "My dad saw the video," then paused like the rest was stuck behind his teeth, and, for the first time, he signed me up for something. Arya blinked, unsure what to say, but before she could answer, he added, "He said, if you could stand there and take a hit and still show up, then I could too." And then he walked off, simple as that, leaving Arya holding his words like a gift too fragile to unwrap. She didn't tell Jax that story, not right away, but he seemed to feel it anyway, because the next day when she came home, there was a new addition on the wall of the garage, a clean wooden rack freshly sanded with pegs for belts of every color. And at the top, carved into the grain, in quiet cursive, it said, "The line we stand on." Arya stood before it for a long moment, fingers brushing over the letters, then reached into her bag and pulled out her belt, the same one she'd worn since she was 10, frayed at the ends, stained in places with sweat and time, and hung it, not at the top, but on the third peg, exactly where it belonged. That night after dinner, she sat beside Jax on the porch steps, both holding mugs of tea gone lukewarm, and she finally asked the question that had been sitting in her throat for days. "Why didn't you give me the black belt that morning after we trained before we went back to the dojo?" He didn't answer right away, just sipped, eyes watching the last of the sunset slip behind the trees, then said, "Because that belt isn't something you wear to feel ready. It's something you stop needing when you are." And those words hit her harder than any roundhouse ever could, because she realized in that moment that everything she'd been chasing, the validation, the belief, the recognition, had never really lived in the belt or the mat or the views. It had lived in the way she kept showing up, even when it hurt, especially when no one believed her, in the way she stayed, standing the day the room went silent, in the way she didn't scream or demand. She endured. She trained. She returned. Later, alone in her room, she opened the shadow box one last time, not to take the belt out, but to slide the glass closed and lock it, not to keep it from the world, but to let the story inside rest. The next day she walked into the dojo to find Coach Willard and a group of students gathered around the whiteboard, where someone had written in neat block letters, "Respect is not given, it is carried." No one claimed authorship, no one erased it. When class began, Arya took her usual place, not in front, not behind. And when Willard asked if she wanted to lead, she shook her head and said, "Let Quinn do it." And just like that, she stepped aside, because she knew that leadership wasn't about being seen. It was about making space for others to rise. And in that quiet act, she passed something on, something no belt could measure: the legacy of standing without needing to be asked. The sky was soft with morning when Arya arrived early to the field behind the community center, the kind of light that made the world feel pause, like everything had taken a breath before the day began. She stood alone in the dew-kissed grass, barefoot, arms loose at her sides, breathing in slowly, her eyes closed, not meditating, not performing, just remembering what it felt like to be centered before anyone else arrived, before any voices filled the air, before any movement needed to be made. She could still hear the echo of Jax's footsteps behind her, even though he wasn't there yet, or maybe wouldn't come this time, because there was a weight to legacy that didn't always need presence. It just needed to be honored. When the students started trickling in, they didn't run or shout like usual. They walked softer, spoke quieter, as if they could feel the air was different, not sad, not tense, just sacred in a way they couldn't name. One by one, they formed the usual uneven lines, waiting, watching, and Arya opened her eyes and stepped forward, not to lead right away, but to kneel beside a small wooden box she'd placed at the center of the grass. She opened it gently, and inside lay her old white belt, folded neatly beside a photo of Jax standing beside her years ago, both mid-bow, both smiling, like the world was still wide open, and next to that, The black belt he had once set beside a post, still untouched, still waiting. She didn't take it out. She didn't wear it. She simply let the students see it. Because this wasn't about elevation, it was about remembering. When she stood, she said only this: "We carry those who taught us not by repeating them, but by honoring what they gave us, in silence, in breath, in action." Then she turned, bowed to the group, and began the warm-up, each form precise but unhurried, each stance grounded not in performance but in purpose. Halfway through the session, she stepped back and pointed to Brielle, one of the girls who had spoken up weeks earlier, and said, "Lead next," and without hesitation, the girl moved forward, strong, calm, ready. Aria watched her, and for the first time saw someone who didn't need to prove anything, only to continue. After class ended, as the kids scattered and the sun rose higher, Aria sat beneath the oak tree, the box in her lap, her fingers tracing the edges of the folded belts, when she felt a presence settle beside her. Not loud, not announced, and she looked up to find Jax lowering himself onto the grass, groaning a little, as he sat, but with that same quiet ease he always carried. They didn't speak at first. They didn't need to. Then, after a long silence, he said, "I saw her, the girl who led." Aria smiled. She didn't even hesitate. Jax nodded. "Neither did you." She looked out over the field at the footprints still visible in the grass, at the breeze stirring the edge of the mat someone had brought from home, at the ripple of leaves above, and asked, "Do you think they'll remember any of this?" Jax sipped from a thermos he had brought, eyes narrowed against the sun. "They already do," he said. "You can tell by the way they stand." She leaned her head against his shoulder, then just briefly, and he didn't move, just let her be still beside him, the way he always had, the way people do when they know presence is the deepest kind of gift. When they finally rose to leave, Aria picked up the box, but didn't close it. She left it open on the bench, not as an offering, not as a shrine, but as a quiet reminder that strength isn't always something we carry forward. Sometimes it's what we leave behind, so others can find their own way to stand on it. She never shouted. She never begged to be believed, but the world heard her anyway, not through noise, but through strength, the kind that shows up even after being struck down, the kind that teaches without yelling, the kind that outlasts applause. If this story moved you even a little, let us know in the comments below. Have you ever been told your truth didn't matter? Share your moment. Someone here needs to read it. And don't forget, like, comment, subscribe. Because at Flow Story, we don't just tell stories, we stand with the ones who live them.